LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the May 3rd edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me again this week of the pandemic. I'm wearing Pandemic Peach. And again, this week, I hope you are all staying safe and well. This week, I have the 15 best, most newsworthy clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. There's a clip list down at a link in the video description if you want to follow along on my notes about what my 15 clips are, and the source of all the clips down in the video description as well. I have two topics. The first 13 clips are on, of course, the pandemic topic. Partisan Pandemic is the topic this week because at a time when the nation needs unity, we are getting these splits between the red and the blue states, and especially divisive rhetoric from our divider-in-chief, President Donald Trump, that make people's views of the pandemic getting more and more partisan. There's a partisan split in the media. There's these protesters, although they're small if you read the polls, and that will come up in the news summaries. And then I will also have a couple clips at the end on the Biden battle on this sexual assault allegation that made it into the mainstream media, MSNBC, and first, Chris Hayes covered it on All In with Chris Hayes, and then Joe Biden came on to Morning Joe with Joe Scarborough. I watched all that, and that's covered in most of the news summaries, and I'll have two clips about that at the end. And if you stay tuned all the way to the end, I will actually talk a little bit. I don't know how many of you saw this police misconduct video that went viral nationwide on Tuesday, I think it was. It was retweeted by, I think, Julian Castro and Kamala Harris, and it was right here in Sacramento County, the Rancho Cordova Police Department, and I will talk about how I may end up getting involved in that publicly tomorrow, maybe not, but stay tuned to the end for that if that interests you. But first, for the political comedy clip, I'm still been not very happy with Real Time with Bill Maher. There was no Saturday Night Live this week, and Bill Maher continues to be disappointing. He has this weird, there's no audience for his monologue. He has these weird, file clips of audience members laughing at his jokes, from like weird different old-timey audiences, or sometimes it's like political rallies, or anyway, it's a little better than some of the other ways people have adapted, I guess. But it's not live. I don't know why he doesn't. He used to do a show live every Friday, and it would sometimes be up to date, and now he seems to be like a day or two behind. In fact, he kind of covered my topic from last week about Dr. Trump telling people to inject disinfectants into their body or whatever. That was he covered that in his monologue, that was actually from the week before last, but like I said, he's a couple days behind. So instead of that political comedy, I'm going to give you, as found political comedy, Jake Tapper's response to a long rant from White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow. And I'm going to show you the whole clip later, clip 8 on my clip list. But I found it amusing because I think if you read between the lines, it's like Jake Tapper saying, thanks for all that bullshit, which I could spend 15 minutes refuting, but I guess that wouldn't be fair to you because there wouldn't be any time left for you to respond. And I will talk about that clip a little more after we watch it together over here.
So I could respond with 15 minutes worth of stuff right there, but unfortunately, I don't have the time. We have 3 other interviews to get to. And no, it's fine. It's fine. You obviously felt passionate about that. I mean, I think that there are certainly issues people could raise, but I'm not going to bring them up right now because I don't have time to let you respond, which would be the fair thing to do. So let me just thank you. And I hope that the economy goes the way you want it to. Larry Kudlow, appreciate it. Coming up, protesters, some of them armed, demanding an end to...
And that was actually an intro to the Gretchen Whitmer clip, which, dropped my clip list. That's the Gretchen Whitmer clip talking about the protesters in Michigan is clip number 12. But if you want to see that whole Larry Kudlow clip that Jake Tapper, he couldn't help smirking through some of it, and I think it's because he was thinking of that last response he was going to give, like, that was all bullshit, but I don't have time to refute it, so bye-bye Larry Kudlow. Anyway, that's the kind of thing I find amusing when I don't have good political comedy from professional comedians, and it's getting kind of scarce these days, I guess. That's all I have left, and now I'm going to move from that to the news summaries. There, as usual, NBC News' Meet the Press had the best, longest news summary that it kind of covered the topic I'm talking about. Speaking of how things are getting kind of scarce, one of the things I've noticed about the broadcasts of the mainstream media since the pandemic started is that it shows how when they get out of their studios, when they're working from home, that a lot of, especially their guests, when they're like Skyping in and stuff, I have a lot better quality setup than some of the people who are like working for huge corporate media outlets. And they've always had a few problems, and I sometimes have problems on my broadcasts, as all of you know, but they have like a whole team of people working, and I'm all doing this myself. But it seemed to be, now that they're working from home setups like I do, they seem to have a lot more screw-ups, and there's like this weird blackout of the background of when Chuck Todd starts off his introduction here, you'll see. But other than that, well, I have a few more comments about it, but I think I've talked enough, and I will talk more about this 4.5-minute news summary from NBC News' Meet the Press that covers my topic, both my topics. I think there's something about Joe Biden in here too, and the Tara Reade allegations. So I'll talk about all of that more with you after we watch together over here.
Good Sunday morning. It was on January 6th that the CDC first issued a travel notice for Wuhan, China. Consider what has happened in less than 4 months' time. More than 1.1 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 have been diagnosed in the U.S., and more than 66,000 Americans have died. The American economy shrunk by nearly 5% in the first quarter, with the worst yet to come. And some 30 million Americans have filed for unemployment benefits just in the past 6 weeks alone. Those are the sobering numbers. But this has not been like other crises, think 9/11, Oklahoma City, even the Challenger accident. Instead of being united in grief, much of America is divided by politics. We see it in the anti-social distancing protests in states extending stay-at-home guidelines. We see it in a Gallup poll that finds 44% of Republicans would be willing to return to normal activities right now if there were no restrictions, while only 4% of Democrats say the same thing. We see it in Vice President Pence not wearing a face mask at the Mayo Clinic, where it's the rule. And we can even see it in the Wall Street Journal report that the Trump campaign has ordered red Trump-branded face masks for supporters. It all prompted this statement yesterday from former President George W. Bush. In the final analysis, we are not partisan combatants. We are human beings, equally vulnerable and equally wonderful in the sight of God. Of course, there have been countless acts of kindness, generosity, and heroism, especially from our healthcare workers. But much of that good news is obscured by the intensifying and often partisan debate over when and how to reopen this country.
We're going to open safely and quickly, I hope, because we have to get our country back.
The president is pressing states to end stay-at-home orders. And by tomorrow, 33 states will have begun the process of at least partial reopening after federal social distancing guidelines expired on Thursday.
Mother's Day is coming up. Your mama told you to wash your hands and cover your nose and mouth if you cough. As long as we do those simple things and use common sense, we ought to be just fine.
They did misleading pictures acting like, this was like Lollapalooza on the beach or something like that. Has there been some type of major outbreak? No.
But in Michigan, where armed demonstrators stormed the Capitol this week,
swastikas and Confederate flags, nooses, and automatic rifles do not represent who we are as Michiganders. Nothing that I want more than to just flip a switch and return to normal. But that's not how it's going to work, unfortunately.
On Tuesday, the president promised to meet the testing benchmark set by a Harvard study.
Are you saying you're confident you can surpass 5 million tests per day? Is that?
Well, we're going to be there very soon.
On Wednesday, he walked that back.
I didn't say it, but somebody came out with a report saying 5 million. I think that was from the Harvard report. But, We are going to be there at a certain point.
Even so, the president and his political aides are trying to recast the federal response to the pandemic as a success story.
We did all the right moves. I think we did a spectacular job. We have saved thousands and thousands of lives. I can even make that, if you want, hundreds of thousands of lives.
The government, federal government, rose to the challenge, and this is a great success story.
The language is nothing new. For months, as the death toll has risen, the president has declared in some form or another, mission accomplished.
When you have 15 people, and the 15 within a couple of days is going to be down to close to zero, that's a pretty good job we've done. As we near the end of our historic battle with the invisible enemy, we can begin the next front in our war, which we're calling opening up America again.
Back in late February, you predicted that the number of cases would go down to zero. How did we get from your prediction of 0 to 1 million?
Well, it will go down to zero ultimately.
President's own public health experts warn against reopening too quickly.
You can't just leap over things and get into a situation where you're really tempting a rebound.
But perhaps motivated by the political calendar, the White House is presenting a rosier timeline.
Early summer, we could be in a much better place as a nation.
May is the transition month, May and June probably.
By June, a lot of the country should be back to normal.
And joining me now is Dr. Tom Inglesby. He's the director at the Center for Health Security.
Yeah, I will have a clip of Dr. Tom Inglesby later. I've had him on a clip of him before. He's the head of one of the public health security. I have to look at my notes for it's like this huge long thing at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. School of Public Health. No, not School of Medicine, School of Public Health. But anyway, I'll have a clip from him later. I guess the NBC News Meet the Press news summary didn't mention Joe Biden. I think it came up somewhere, but in that news summary, they talked a lot about the partisan divide in views of the pandemic. But actually, after that and they held Trump accountable for a lot of his misstatements. They even mentioned Mike Pence not wearing the mask at the Mayo Clinic, and how there's partisan divide in the states and the protests. They had Gretchen Whitmer talking about the racist symbols, the nooses, the swastikas, and I'll have a clip of Gretchen Whitmer talking about that a little bit later to Jake Tapper on CNN State of the Union. That's clip number 12. Looking down at my clip list. By the way, if you want to follow along on my clip list, you can know all the clips that are coming up. I don't know why I always try to promote the clip list, but anyway, that's kind of silly. But the NBC News Meet the Press actually was very nonpartisan, and most of the guests they had, Tom Inglesby from Johns Hopkins was very nonpartisan. They had like public health officers from Alabama and Michigan, but not talking in a partisan way. They were like the public health officials. So they are doing very different things in Alabama and Michigan. And basically the whole thing was fairly nonpartisan after this whole news summary about a partisan pandemic. And anyway, I want to get to the other 3 news summaries I have for you here. Well, kind of 4, but one of them's pretty short. But the next one, CNN's State of the Union, Jake Tapper, where the State of the Union this week, as you might expect in the middle of a pandemic, is worried and talking about how we've hit 60,000 deaths, and Trump's response is basically to rage tweet from Camp David, and there's more in the news summary that's much shorter, only about 80 seconds long, that I'll talk about with you after we watch together over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is worried. More than 60,000 people in the United States have died from coronavirus at this hour. Just think about this. One coronavirus death in this country was reported every 44 seconds during the month of April, and many experts predict another major wave of coronavirus could happen in the fall or the winter. And yet, President Trump spent his, quote, working weekend at Camp David, seemingly on Twitter, tweeting not primarily about those who have lost loved ones or livelihoods, but attacking journalists, criticizing George W. Bush and the Mueller investigation, touting his own approval ratings, and expressing happiness that Kim Jong-un is apparently alive and well, among other matters. Today, despite concerns from health officials that it's premature, Americans across the country are no longer under stay-at-home orders. More than half of states are relaxing their guidelines and opening more non-essential businesses as states look to ease the severe economic pain this pandemic has caused. Top experts are now predicting the worst economy of our lifetimes. In the last 6 weeks, more than 30 million Americans have filed for unemployment for the first time. To give you some perspective, that's equivalent to the entire population of Texas. Joining me now to discuss the economic challenges from the White House, President Trump's top economic advisor, Larry Kudlow. Mr. Kudlow.
And like I promised, I will have the clip of the week, the Larry Kudlow clip 8. If you're following along on the clip list, I saw one of my live viewers caged in the live comment saying I can never understand the clip list. So just to sort of parse out what's supposed to be in what the clip's supposed to mean, I'm going to show you my notes here, or read to you my notes from that last clip. Clip number 3, first letters VIR. That means the topic is virus, because 13 of the 15 clips are on the topic virus. The last 2 are on Dem, the Democratic nomination. So first 3 letters VIR, next 3 letters CNN, that tells you the network. Jake, that's the anchor talking. SOU, State of the Union, is worried. More than 60,000 or 60K, but Trump rage tweets Camp David. There's a superfluous E in here because there are a lot of typos because I'm like typing these while I'm watching the clips. Job loss, worst economy. So not that hard to understand, but that's, if you're wondering what like the stuff at the beginning means, the like first 6 letters tell you like the topic and the network, and then the next word is going to be the first person speaking, and then you'll see when there's a newsmaker clip it'll say versus whoever the guest is in the clip list. So that's, if you really want to follow along in my notes, that's a little basic primer on how to read my clip list notes. But I think I talked enough about that last clip just by reading my notes, and I'll go to the CBS News Face the Nation news summary. And now, if you are a frequent viewer of my show, you know that up until the pandemic, CBS News Face the Nation didn't usually do news summaries, and Margaret Brennan often doesn't talk very much. You'll see she does very little talking here. She introduces 2 reporters that give news summaries and of course, as I pointed out many weeks in a row, CBS News Face the Nation covered the coronavirus, COVID-19, weeks before any of the other 4 big 5 corporate outlets on the Sunday shows. We were just looking at the Sunday shows. Face the Nation was like 3 weeks ahead of all the other networks. And if you remember, I didn't take clips from those news summaries, but I mentioned they were either exaggerating the importance of the story compared to the other outlets, or they were the one network that had actually talked about what was going to be the most important story. And I wasn't sure what it was going to be. I'm not saying that I knew, but I'm saying CBS News' Face the Nation should, every week I have to give them kudos a little bit for that. And here's their news summary from Mark Strassman in Atlanta, talking about the different way the states are splitting up, and also talking about the economic problems. And then there's this whole China thing at the end. I'm not going to show the second reporter, Elizabeth Palmer, their foreign reporter who is always reporting from London. I'll show the very beginning and the transition to that for reasons that I will discuss with you after we watch that 3-minute, 16-second news summary together over here.
Welcome to Face the Nation. As we turn the page to a new month, Americans continue to struggle emotionally, financially, and with just trying to plan ahead. In most cases, there are few clear answers to our many questions. We will continue to seek them for you. Our coverage begins today with CBS News national correspondent Mark Strassman in Atlanta.
In America's COVID siege, exasperation can morph into rage. Weekend protesters were furious. They argued our oxygen-starved economy needs a ventilator, reopen for business. With 30 million jobs lost, millions of people are running low on something: food, toilet paper, patience, and especially money. You'll probably notice more stores reopening this week. 38 states have already eased restrictions. 6 more will follow suit tomorrow and Tuesday, all emphasizing social distancing.
If we hear minimal reports of knucklehead behavior at our parks and we see the metrics we need to meet, then we know that you all have taken to heart your responsibility.
Another concern, food shortages. Across the country, widespread COVID infections have closed 22 meat and poultry processing plants. The virus has killed at least 20 workers, and at least 279 have been infected in Maryland.
Any disruption or interruption to processing at our poultry processing plants could lead to significant national supply chain issues.
Most health experts worry about a shortage of COVID testing. As April ended, the U.S. had conducted 6.2 million COVID tests. But a Harvard study concluded the country needs 5 million tests a day by early June to reopen safely. And Maryland and Colorado plan to hide their PPE from the federal government.
A global free-for-all. We're just worried about them cutting them off at the manufacturer during the supply chain or during customs.
But there's no hiding a looming financial crisis for dozens of states. Record job losses have drained their unemployment trust funds. Massachusetts, New York, Ohio, and West Virginia all have enough to pay 1 more week's worth of benefits. 4 other states have 2 weeks. And more than 40% of Americans live in states with less than 6 weeks. Several dozen malls around the country will reopen tomorrow. Here in Atlanta, Phipps Plaza behind me is one of them. Georgia has led the charge nationally to reopen, but on Friday, new COVID infections jumped again. The state reported 1,000 new cases in 24 hours. Margaret?
Mark Strassman, thanks. China claims that the coronavirus outbreak began in an animal market in Wuhan. The U.S. intelligence community is investigating that theory and the possibility that it was accidentally released from a lab. Either way, U.S.-China relations are at a new low. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer reports on COVID-19 hotspots around the world.
Margaret, China was the very first country to enforce radical...
So you can see the China angle at the end of the CBS News Face the Nation clip that I just showed you, where they transitioned to their foreign correspondent, Elizabeth Palmer, as I talked about before I showed the clip. One little mistake I noticed in there is they talked about how Colorado and Maryland are hiding their PPE, which personal protective equipment, so it's not commandeered by the federal government. Although in Maryland, it's actually Larry Hogan is hiding tests at an undisclosed. He got like 500,000 tests from South Korea because his wife is South Korean and has contacts in South Korea and ethnically South Korean, I guess. I think she's born in the United States, but anyway. So that was, but there was a lot of good information there, especially about the states that are running out of unemployment money. California, I didn't even know California was going to run out in 2 weeks. And anyway, a lot of good reporting in there from Mark Strassman and the CBS News Face the Nation news summary there. And then the final news summary, although I wanted to emphasize that China reporting at the end because there is sort of an aspect to the partisanship that involves China, the partisan pandemic. That's my first topic here. And sometimes I've talked about CBS News Face the Nation being Fox News Light, which is Fox News, if you are familiar with this book over here, The Loudest Voice in the Room by Gabriel Sherman, you know that Fox News was created as a propaganda arm of the Republican Party. There is some journalism that happens over there, but it's kind of incidental to the main purpose of the network, which is furthering the aims of the Republican Party, and now for the last couple of years, mostly furthering the aims of the cult of Donald Trump, which the Republican Party has become. CBS News' Face the Nation I call it Fox News Light sometimes because it's actually a journalistic organization. It's not a propaganda arm of the Republican Party, but it's journalism with a sort of a more rightward spin, and you can see some of the echoes of Fox News in that last CBS News Face the Nation news summary of the week in that it emphasized the evil China. I mean, China did some bad things. I'm not saying China didn't do bad things, but Trump's strategy for re-election has to do with blaming China, the WHO, states, especially blue states and Democrats. And part of the whole China thing is, if you remember back in the whole impeachment fiasco, when Trump asked the Ukraine to investigate Biden, he also asked China to investigate Biden because I guess Hunter Biden's company got a big investment deal from China, and he went over on Hunter Biden went to China on Air Force One with Joe Biden. So I think there's this whole strategy to blame China for the virus and then blame Biden for being soft on China. I've even seen Trump talk about how if Biden wins, China's going to own this country. China and a bunch of other countries are going to own this country because they own Joe Biden. So with that as context, here is the final news summary from Fox News Sunday. Chris Wallace. There was one other thing in my notes I wanted to... Oh, they also talk about remdesivir, which is this new supposed miracle drug that's going to help treat COVID-19, which did get some positive reports from Anthony Fauci this week, and I may talk about that a little more after we watch this final news summary together over here.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. 2 months into the coronavirus pandemic, some 30 states are now easing their lockdown measures, even as cases here pass the 1.1 million mark, and health experts warn of a second wave. But there is a new medical breakthrough. The first drug that appears to help patients recover faster, now cleared for use by the FDA. In a moment, we'll talk exclusively with Dr. Deborah Birx, coordinator of the White House Coronavirus Task Force. But first, let's bring in Mark Meredith with the latest on the patchwork reopening of this country. Mark.
Chris, protesters in several states continue to demand that governors loosen public health restrictions, but some fear easing now may lead to a worse outbreak down the road.
I know that people are itching to get back to work, and I get it.
Michigan's governor is refusing to, even as governors in many other states say now's the time to reopen.
Opening the parks back up is consistent with my safe, smart, step-by-step plan to reopen Florida.
Health officials had urged reopening only after reporting a 14-day decline in new cases, but with outrage growing and job losses piling up, many governors are charting their own path.
Cheers.
In Texas, malls and restaurants are reopening with limited capacity.
We're going to kind of slow down the operations a little bit and work with about 60 people.
In Pennsylvania, golf courses are back open, while in Washington, President Trump says he's considering economic retaliation against China.
We're not happy, obviously, with what happened. This is a bad situation.
An Australian newspaper reports the U.S. and its allies have intelligence China intentionally destroyed evidence tied to the outbreak and even silenced medical experts as the virus first began to spread. On Friday, the Labor Department will release the April jobs report. White House officials say they expect the unemployment rate will skyrocket. It's something President Trump could talk about a little bit more when he gets back from Camp David. He's going to be coming back this afternoon for a Fox News town hall later on tonight. Chris?
Mark Meredith reporting from the White House. Mark, thank you. Joining us now, Dr. Deborah Birx.
And I'm going to have 2 clips of Dr. Deborah Birx, which are, I've talked about her possibly losing her reputation in past weeks for doing sort of like dodging questions, and she actually says some painful truths in the Deborah Birx clips that are coming up if you're following along on the clip list in clips 9 and 11. But that was the last news summary, the Fox News Sunday news summary. I think I pretty much pre-criticized it, although did I say that it seems really favorable pro-protesters who want to get the states to reopen, and reopening states like the red states that are starting to reopen, even though Chris Wallace does point out later in his interview with Deborah Birx in a clip I don't show that None of the states that are reopening have had their cases decline for 14 days like the guidelines were supposed to, the federal guidelines put out by the Trump task force said that you're not supposed to start phase 1 of reopening till you have 14 days of decline, and none of them really do. But the thing I want to cover next is this whole China angle that I was talking about before the last clip. This next clip is not Fox News Sunday, but it's ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where Martha Raddatz, the co-host, the permanent co-host, or I guess her title is co-host, didn't I establish that last week? They had Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on, and Martha Raddatz asked Mike Pompeo about this whole investigation into China and whether this was a man-made or genetically modified virus that originated in Wuhan, in a Wuhan lab in Wuhan, China. And you'll see in there, like all the intelligence agencies say it's not man-made or genetically modified. That's one issue. And then there's this separate issue as to whether it was possibly released by the Wuhan lab by mistake, like a naturally occurring virus they were studying, and then there was like a lab accident and it got out that way. And that actually has not been disproved, although hasn't been proved, but the whole man-made genetically modified thing has been disproved. And at one point, Mike Pompeo says that it was man-made, but it's like he didn't hear the question. It reminds me of this old Dick Cheney clip from NBC News' Meet the Press before the Iraq War, where he says that they do have a nuclear program, and then he says, "Oh no, I meant to say they don't have it." It's like Donald Trump in Helsinki with Putin. I don't know why they wouldn't. I meant I don't know why they, whatever. That's too many analogies. Let's just get to the interview with Mike Pompeo with Martha Raddatz on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, without George Stephanopoulos this morning over here.
So on a timeline that is our own.
And as for the origins of COVID-19, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence...
Oh, one thing I forgot to say is, when you're questioning Trump administration officials, you shouldn't be able to say the origins. You should always have to say oranges. The oranges of the virus, the oranges of the pandemic. That should be a rule. I'm just saying that. And anyway, I'll start the clip again for you here.
So on a timeline that is our own.
And as for the origins of COVID-19, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a statement this week saying the virus did originate in China, but concurs with the wide scientific consensus that the COVID-19 virus was not man-made or genetically modified. Statement going on to say that they will continue to examine whether the outbreak began through contact with infected animals or if it was the result of an accident in a laboratory in Wuhan. Later, the president was asked if he had seen anything that gave him high confidence that the Wuhan lab was the origin of the virus. Let's listen.
Have you seen anything at this point that gives you a high degree of confidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the origin of this virus?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
What gives you a high degree of confidence that this originated from the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
I can't tell you that. I'm not allowed to tell you that.
And Mr. Secretary, have you seen anything that gives you high confidence that it originated in that Wuhan lab?
Martha, there's enormous evidence that that's where this began. We've said from the beginning that this was a virus that originated in Wuhan, China. We took a lot of grief for that from the outset, but I think the whole world can see now. Remember, China has a history of infecting the world, and they have a history of running substandard laboratories. These are not the first times that we've had a world exposed to viruses as a result of failures in a Chinese lab. And so while the Intelligence Committee continues to do its work, they should continue to do that and verify so that we are certain. I can tell you that there is a significant amount of evidence that this came from that laboratory in Wuhan.
Do you believe it was man-made or genetically modified?
Look, the best experts so far seem to think it was man-made. I have no reason to disbelieve that at this point.
Your Office of the DNI says the consensus, the scientific consensus, was not man-made or genetically modified.
That's right. I agree with that. Yeah, I've seen their analysis. I've seen the summary that you saw that was released publicly. I have no reason to doubt that that is accurate at this point.
Okay, so just to be clear, you do not think it was man-made or genetically modified?
I've seen what the intelligence committee has said. I have no reason to believe that they've got it wrong. Martha, you have to put this in context. Here's what's important, Martha. Here's what's important. The Chinese Communist Party had the opportunity to prevent all of the calamity that has befallen the world. And here we find ourselves today. You and I were talking about we haven't seen each other physically for a long time. That's true of people all across the world. This is an enormous crisis created by the fact that the Chinese Communist Party reverted to form, reverted to the kinds of disinformation, the kinds of concealment that authoritarian regimes do. Had those scientists been operating in America, they would have put this out, there would have been an exchange of ideas, and we would have quickly identified the kinds of things that needed to be done in response. Instead, China behaved like authoritarian regimes do, attempted to conceal and hide and confuse. It employed the World Health Organization as a tool to do the same. These are the kind of things that have now presented this enormous crisis, an enormous loss of life, and tremendous economic cost all across the globe. The Australians agree with that. You hear the Europeans beginning to say the same thing. I think the whole world is united, understanding that China brought this virus to the world.
And just very quickly, if we can, Mr.
So yeah, like I said before I showed the clip, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo did in that clip say that the virus was man-made. Martha Raddatz called him on it. I'm like, what? And he said he didn't even acknowledge he had said it, and instead just said the evidence shows it's not man-made. So I don't know, what is that, like some sort of weird Trump administration bamboozled? You know, that's one of the things Trump does that's so annoying, is he takes every position on every issue. He contradicts himself in the same sentence, and so if you try to call him on it 2 months or 3 months later, they point out, well, he said the opposite in the same sentence, so he never really said anything, did he? I mean, what was that? I don't know. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. But I think that you can see in that clip the thrust of the Trump administration strategy to blame others for the failures of Trump to prevent the spread of COVID-19. I mean, not that China doesn't have any blame, but I'm just saying Trump has blame in addition to the blame that China has. And anyway, I'm going to move on to the next clip. This is the clip I teased with my first clip, my so-called political comedy clip, where I showed Jake Tapper reacting to a long rant from Larry Kudlow, the White House economic advisor. And, this next clip is the full clip I promised. If you're following along on the clip list, it's clip number 8. And in this clip, Jake Tapper asked Larry Kudlow both about this whistleblower who got reassigned, who on the same day that Larry Kudlow said that the coronavirus was contained, airtight, or almost airtight. And I remember that because people made fun of him at the time, because almost airtight for a virus is not contained, and it turned out not contained. But there's also this whistleblower who on the same day said that our daily life, it was not a question of if but when there were going to be major disruptions in our daily life. And that is one of many whistleblowers who have been targeted by the Trump administration for telling the truth. And talk about how communist China has done bad things. That's one of the bad things that communist China has done that Larry Kudlow talks about here. But that's also what Trump is doing. Not as bad as communist China, of course, but when you punish people who tell the truth, you are not having the transparency you need to fight a pandemic. And kudos to Jake Tapper for pointing that out to Larry Kudlow. Then there's the long Larry Kudlow rant, followed by the political comedy clip I showed you in clip 1, which I will talk to you about a little more after we watch that clip from CNN's State of the Union together over here.
I guess the reason for the disconnect is that sometimes the people who understandably want to get the economy up and running have been saying things that contradict what some of the people who are health experts in the administration are saying. For instance, at the end of February, Dr. Nancy Messonnier, who apparently got in the doghouse for saying in a conference call, doghouse with President Trump, for saying in a conference call that it was not a matter of if, but when there would be a severe disruption to the American people and our way to live life. And that's the same day, as you know, that you said this. Let's roll that tape.
We have contained this, I won't say airtight, but pretty close to airtight. We've done a good job in the United States.
So I guess the question is there a disconnect between what people such as you who want things to be better than they are so as to help the economy are saying and what people in the health field are saying?
Well, look, Jake, for the umpteenth time, I will say my quote then was based on the actual facts, which at the time there were only 40 or 50 cases, and it was contained, particularly after President Trump boldly put up travel restrictions with China. That's what I didn't make a forecast so far, and that was just, there was hardly any cases. Okay, now, yes, some doctors were more fearful. Other doctors had many different things to say. I don't want to get in and play this game, who said what and when. Political leaders, one well-known political leader in the House went to Chinatown in San Francisco and said everything is okay. Okay, one important anchor on your network as late as mid-March said basically the COVID-19 virus was no worse than an ordinary flu year. I mean, there are people saying, my quote was, at that time, there were very few cases. Then, as the virus spread exponentially in ways that virtually no one could have predicted, of course, we changed our mind. Going forward, the president and the vice president have taken strong measures, step by step by step, okay? Strong measures to deal with this unexpected outbreak. And I think, you know, the sort of ankle biting that's going on in Washington is just incorrect. You have to deal with the information at hand. When the information changes, you change. We changed our strategy. So did everybody else around the world change their strategy. So I'm just not going to accept that, Jake. I'm sorry to push back. You and I have known each other a while, but that's the fact. We did what we had to do as soon as the situation became much clearer. And right up to the recent times, all right, Dr. Fauci, Deborah, others, through the vice president's task force and ultimately the president's direction, we issued guidelines, best practices, testing, diagnostics. We produced the goods on the face masks, the ventilators, and other forms of equipment. We have unleashed a tsunami of help to the states, to the hospitals. We've worked well with the governors. I mean, this is very important because I think this line of reasoning that somehow the president was wrong or late or this or that, there were a lot of different voices, but his leadership has brought us to this point, Jake. Here's my bottom line. This point, we are entering a transitional period. The economy will be gradually reopened state by state based on our guidelines and what the governor's guidelines. And we've been meeting with the governors throughout this period. So I think we have done, things that happen once every 100 years, Jake, they're pretty hard to predict precisely at the moment. I think you'll concede that. But we are optimists now. We got to get through the next month or two. And we are optimists about an economy based on economic growth incentives and a rescue mission for the unemployment problem.
So I could respond with 15 minutes worth of stuff right there. But unfortunately, I don't have the time. We have 3 other interviews to get to. And no, it's fine. It's fine. You obviously felt passionate about that. I mean, I think that there are certainly issues people could raise, but I'm not going to bring them up right now because I don't have time to let you respond, which would be the fair thing to do. So let me just thank you. And I hope that the economy goes the way you want it to. Larry Kudlow, appreciate it. Coming up, protesters, some of them armed, demanding an end to...
I hope the economy goes the way you want it to, but the rest of that was bullshit. I could spend 15 minutes refuting that. Well, I hope that whole clip gives you the context to the first found political comedy clip I showed you for my Sunday live clip roundup, where Jake Tapper, at the end of a long rant of misinformation or skewed, like, administration spin, there's, well, like Jake Tapper said, you could spend a long time trying to refute what Larry Kudlow said, but is that what we really want to spend our time on during the zombie apocalypse? Do we really want to spend our time refuting Larry Kudlow, who is obviously hired by Donald Trump because he liked watching him on TV, specifically on Fox News, and he's often wrong, but never in doubt. That is the kind of power of positive thinking that Donald Trump likes. You know, that's one of Donald Trump's basic motivating, his basic motivating, there's the power positive, what's that guy's, I can't even remember the name of the guy who came up with the power of positive thinking. Maybe you can let me know in the comment section, and that reminds me, along the way, I saw that I got a few super chat contributors. I'm going to show you that here. So thanks to Lulu Girl and Kameshwari Kate and Sinful Solutions for those super chat contributions, which make it more economically reasonable for me to spend 8 to 10 hours a day every Sunday for it's. You know, I didn't even celebrate my 7th anniversary doing LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. I think if you multiply 52 weeks a year by 7, you get, 366, is it? And I got a comment when I did LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup number 365 that I had done a year of Sundays. I guess 7 years of Sundays is a year of Sundays. And so I've been doing this for 7 years. I'm going to keep doing it at least for the rest of 2020. Then I'm going to reevaluate based on things like how much my time is remunerated in our capitalist system, which is why I appreciate my Patreon monthly contributors down in the at a link down in the video description. There's a way to support my videos on Patreon. There's also PayPal. I actually just got a PayPal contribution from someone in the UK I noticed while I was talking. And also, of course, the Super Chat contributors and the join button down below my video. But so I wanted to take a minute out to mention that. And now I want to get to one of my 2 Deborah Birx clips that I promised earlier. This is Deborah Birx telling a hard truth to Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday. So this is the right-wing side of the partisan divide on my topic of partisan pandemic. And some people seem to have thought that there was one point where Trump in his weird 1 to 2 hour press conferences that I watched in total just to be able to comment on it and talk to you now with the knowledge of every weird thing Trump said. Well, at one point he was claiming that our death rate, our number of total deaths from coronavirus might get down to 60,000. Well, we're at 66,000, and here's Deborah Birx responding to the change in the models, talking to Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday this morning over here.
Where are we with the virus? Are we past the peak? Are we down on the downslope now? And given that just a few days ago the White House was projecting 60,000 fatalities and we're already up to 66,000, how many more fatalities should we expect in this country?
Well, first, let me start with our projections have always been between 100 and 240,000 American lives lost, and that's with full mitigation and us learning from each other of how to social distance. Every single metro area and every single outbreak across the country is different. And so whereas New Orleans and now Detroit and some of our other metros are showing a significant decline, others are just reaching steady state. We are encouraged that the New York and New Jersey metro areas are starting to see a decline after a long, flat curve.
As we said, about half the states, more than half the states have started in.
And I kept that clip playing to remind me to say what I said earlier, is that Chris Wallace did actually engage or commit a little bit of journalism on Fox News, which, as I pointed out, if you read this book, The Loudest Voice in the Room, by Gabriel Sherman, you will understand that Fox News was created as a propaganda arm of the Republican Party, but sometimes they inadvertently commit a little journalism there, and you see Chris Wallace got some hard truths from Deborah Birx in that last clip that no, it's not going to be 60,000. We're already at 66,000, and she's saying somewhere between 100,000 and 240,000. And you remember just like a week or two ago, there were these press conferences. I told you I watched all of them, and Trump was saying 100,000 is the lowest, but we're hoping to get much lower than that, and we're not going to get lower than 100,000. That's what Deborah Birx, that was the hard truth you just heard from her. And, you know, the new metric that Trump is using, and before I started this live stream, I watched a little bit of the Trump town hall that's happening on Fox News Sunday, and it's like totally reinforces what I said about the Fox News bias in their news summary there, where it's all about reopen America, and and it's softball questions for Trump. And he was comparing he was saying, he was talking about the herd, and sometimes in his press conferences I heard him refer to it as the herd mentality. But when he just said the herd on Fox News, Brett Baer helpfully corrected one of his many misinformation. They talk about Joe Biden having gaffes. Well, Trump is like a total gaffe machine, and he means herd immunity. Sometimes he talks about the herd, but then sometimes he says the herd mentality. I've never heard him say herd immunity. But anyway, in this next clip, you'll see Tom Inglesby talk to. I'm sorry. The point before I get to the next clip, the point I was making about the herd thing was that when I watched the town hall on Fox News Sunday before I started the live stream, the new metric that Trump is using for his success is if he did nothing. That's the herd thing, the herd mentality, herd immunity. When you get to about 60 to 70% of people in a population having been infected with the virus, where you have immunity after you've been infected, which, last week I was talking about how the WHO pointed out there isn't sufficient evidence to even know that being infected gives you immunity, although that's probably true based on animals, but we don't know how long the immunity lasts, so that's important. But anyway, Trump his new metric for his success is if we'd done nothing, like millions of people would have died. So 100,000, that's really good. But that's basically Trump saying, what I did was better than doing nothing. Keep that in mind for the next several months leading up to the November election. Trump's basic argument is, what I did was better than doing nothing. And sometimes that's not even true. Like when he told people to inject disinfectants into their body, that's actually worse than doing nothing. But anyway, that's the point that I wanted to make about that whole thing. And this next clip is Tom Inglesby, the director of this health security project, or I can never get the name right. Well, here, I'll look at my own video description and I will see that Tom Inglesby is the director of Center for Health Security of Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. And he also gives a much more pessimistic view of what we're going to see. You'll see here Chuck Todd asked for a timeline for the next 3 or 6 months, and he says the virus is not necessarily going away anytime soon, as I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together over here.
Rising. Let's get a realistic timeline. Next 3 months, next 6 months. A lot of people are concerned about the fall. How concerned are you? And is there any way of avoiding a bad fall outcome at this point without either advancements in a treatment or a vaccine?
Well, before we even get to the fall, I am worried that we will have small waves in various places around the country for the coming months. Hopefully we won't, but as we begin to ease social distancing in various places in the country, this virus is highly transmissible. Nothing has changed in the underlying dynamics of this virus. If we stop social distancing altogether tomorrow, we would recreate the conditions that existed in the country in February, March. So what we need to do is continue to our best possible effort, all the individual efforts we're making around social distancing, staying 6 feet apart, wearing masks when in public, avoiding large gatherings. But to the extent to which we're able to do that over the next couple of months will dictate how we do as states and as a country. Ultimately, in the fall, we have an additional challenge. We have influenza that will reappear. The flu season will start. And at that point, COVID will be mixed with flu and will both be contributing to hospitalizations and ICU beds. And so we're going to have two concurrent large public health challenges at the same time. So I am worried about the uptake in hospitalization rate and the more people needing intensive care in the fall. But I don't think people should think that there will be a lull, that just because the summer's coming, we're going to have a lull before the fall. It would be wonderful if that happens, but I don't think we should at all assume that at this point, given the nature of this virus.
And I'm going to leave it there because I think that's the single most important takeaway viewers need to have. Don't call it a lull. It is unlikely we're going to have a lull in the summer. Anyway, Dr. Inglesby from Johns Hopkins University, thanks for...
I don't know, Chuck Todd at the end, don't call it a lull. There won't necessarily be a lull, but he said the word lull so many times it kind of lulled me into thinking there might be a lull. That's one of the things they teach in communications is like, don't repeat the misinformation. Say the, like, instead of saying the word lull over and over again, say that this is going to be a constant virus. It's not going to go away. Don't repeat the misinformation, Chuck Todd. That's my criticism of Chuck Todd at the end of that clip, though it's good information there from Tom Inglesby from Johns Hopkins, and don't make me go back and read his whole title from Johns Hopkins, but he's like a really important guy who knows about pandemics. That's why he's telling us, I mean, until there's a vaccine, and I mean, there are optimistic estimates of a vaccine possibly by sometime in the fall or winter of, at the end of 2020. That's like most optimistic, and that's really fast. Or, you know, the fastest vaccine ever was the mumps vaccine. That was 4 years. And like I was talking about earlier about how immunity might not even, you know, being infected might not even give you immunity or long-term immunity. That means the vaccine might not give you long-term immunity. So there are all sorts of permutations of this virus lasting for a really long time. And so I wanted to emphasize some of that possible pessimism for my partisan pandemic topic. And, oh, well, anyway, that's enough alliteration. I don't want to talk about my pandemic peach shirt that I'm wearing. Well, I did anyway. But this next clip is the second Deborah Birx clip I promised. This is very short on Fox News Sunday, responding to, you know, I criticized Fox News Sunday earlier in the news summary for being very pro reopening states and especially pro protester. And the protesters, the people who are protesting to reopen, according to polls, are like at most a third of respondents. So it's like 1/3 versus 2/3 who are worried about reopening too fast. And Deborah Birx, I think, gives a hard truth that they're not telling often enough on Fox News. So it's almost committing a little bit of journalism again on Fox News with Chris Wallace, Fox News Sunday, talking to Deborah Birx this morning here.
Well, you know that's happening all over the country right now. Let me ask you about one more activity. Big crowds of protesters that went into the Michigan state capitol without masks, massing together in close quarters. I'm not asking you about their First Amendment right to protest. That, of course, they have. But from a public health standpoint, is that safe?
It's devastatingly worrisome to me personally, because if they go home and infect their grandmother or their grandfather who has a comorbid condition and they have a serious or an unfortunate outcome, they will feel guilty for the rest of our lives. So we need to protect each other at the same time we're voicing our discontent.
Let's talk about remdesivir, the FDA.
And I kept that playing because that was the other thing I wanted to criticize Fox News. There was this good news about remdesivir this week, which is an antiviral. It impedes the ability of viruses to replicate. But the good news is that it cuts hospital stays for people who have severe cases of COVID-19. It cuts their hospital stays by like 3 days. And it doesn't really cut mortality rates. And what Anthony Fauci said about remdesivir is that it is good for proof of concept, which is by cutting, and it was a really good study. It was like a double-blind study, which means like not even the people giving the remdesivir knew whether they were giving remdesivir or the placebo. And it showed this 3-day change, and that means that it actually is slowing down replication of the virus, I guess. But that's a proof of concept, which is like in HIV, they came up with these drug cocktails where they would mix together a whole bunch of drugs, which together would make the virus so debilitated that people could survive, and it became like a chronic problem instead of a death sentence. And of course, that's not quite the same from coronavirus, because for most people it's already not a death sentence. It's not like HIV was, which was much less transmissible but much more deadly, which anyway, that's sort of a tangent I didn't mean to go off on. But as you saw in that last clip, Deborah Birx said that, looking at my notes, that having these big crowds at protests is devastatingly worrisome, and these people may end up being guilty for the rest of their lives, talking about specifically the protests in Michigan. And this next clip is Jake Tapper talking to the governor of Michigan about these protests, And also about this analogy people have made to, Trump has been supporting these fringe protesters, often armed protesters, where it's legal to carry firearms, to not concealed, unconcealed firearms are legal apparently in the Michigan State House. That's kind of insane, but shows you what, especially for all my non-U.S. viewers, that is something you might not know about America, but there are many places where if you want to carry an exposed firearm, that's perfectly legal. It's like the OK Corral, I guess. I don't know. It's the Wild West out here in Michigan. The Wild West? I don't know. But Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, talks to Jake Tapper. And as I promised earlier when I talked about the racism and the swastikas, she talks about racism, swastikas, Confederate flags, nooses amongst the protesters. What is that all about? As I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
These protests came after President Trump tweeted, "Liberate Michigan." He tweeted, quote, "The governor of Michigan should give a little, put out the fire." He said that these are very good people about the protesters that were featured in the video, to which the executive director of the Jewish Democratic Council of America, Haley Sofer, who is from Lansing, Michigan, she compared those comments to President Trump referring to those marching alongside neo-Nazis in Charlottesville as very fine people. Is that how you see these protesters, in that vein, in that extreme?
Well, some of the outrageousness of what happened at our Capitol this week, depicted some of the worst racism and awful parts of our history in this country. The Confederate flags and nooses, the swastikas, the, behavior that you've seen in all of the clips is not representative of who we are in Michigan. And the fact of the matter is, we're in a global pandemic. This isn't something we just negotiate ourselves out of, and it's a political matter. This is a public health crisis that has taken the lives of almost 70,000 Americans, has put 30 million people into unemployment. We've lost in the last 24 hours almost the same number of Americans that were killed on 9/11, and that's just in the last 24 hours. We need to listen to the expertise in our institutions of higher learning, in our health system, and make decisions that are going to protect the lives of everyone. Whether you agree with me or not, I'm working to protect your life if you live in the state of Michigan. I'm going to continue to do my job, regardless of what tweets come out or what polls come out or what people think that is, makes sense. We're going to listen to facts and science because we've got to get this right.
White House senior advisor Jared Kushner told the Washington Post yesterday.
And actually, I'm going to get to that Jared Kushner thing I believe in the next clip. Right, don't I? Yeah. In the next clip from CBS News' Face the Nation, where Jared Kushner talks about what a great job that the Trump administration is doing. But you saw in that last clip the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, talking about how there's a lot of racism and racist symbols in these protests, in this partisan divide the partisan pandemic. And you also saw what I was talking about at the beginning of the program about how these actually later Jake Tapper apologized on behalf of CNN for the problems with the video there, where there was a lot of interference with the picture that wasn't on my end, that was on CNN's end, or I don't know, maybe it was on Governor Gretchen Whitmer's end. I didn't take a clip of Gretchen Whitmer defending Joe Biden and the sexual assault allegations against him by Tara Reade, though down in the video description there's a link to State of the Union, and you can see the entire Gretchen Whitmer interview and her defense there, and she's kind of trying out to be Joe Biden's vice president, although I don't think she's in the top few. According to at least polling of what voters want, Elizabeth Warren is number one, followed by Kamala Harris and Stacey Abrams and Amy Klobuchar. Those are like the top 4 possible, since Joe Biden already said he was going to pick a woman. And the clip after next is one of the 2 clips I'm going to show you about the Biden battle, the Tara Reade allegations from 1993. But before I get to that, I want to get to one more clip on the partisan pandemic issue. This is more about the battle between Trump and the states. This is J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, talking to Margaret Brennan here, both about what Jared Kushner said about how all the problems with testing are state problems, and he talks about reagents, he talks about swabs, and he talks about VMT, which I think is like wait, no, is it VMT? No, it's VTM, excuse me, VTM, which is, I think it's viral transport media, virus transport media, viral transfer media. It's something about the stuff you need to move the virus from one place to another. I think that's what VTM is. And anyway, I will talk about that last clip in my partisan pandemic topic after we watch it together over here.
So do you agree then with Kushner when he says the biggest thing holding testing back is the state's ability to collect more samples?
You know, a couple of weeks ago, or maybe a week ago, the White House said that we have all the capacity we need. Well, they're right in the sense that there are plenty of machines that exist in the state of Illinois, but there weren't enough swabs, VTM, and reagent. There still aren't. But the White House is helping, and I appreciate that.
Is it enough?
But it's not enough. It's not enough today. But again, as a state, we're having to go out in the market and compete with every other state to get swabs and VTM and reagents. I wish that the White House had stepped up earlier, and I think they still have the opportunity to do so when it comes to reagent. But the fact is that we're going to overcome this. I believe by midsummer we'll be able to do tens of thousands more tests. And just again in May, we'll be able to do more than we're doing today, which is in the high teens.
Governor, you know, I know that you have said, and other governors have said, that they will need more federal aid because of this crisis. But I want you to respond to this, because before the crisis, Illinois had one of the worst pension problems in the country by your state's own admission. The pensions were underfunded by $129 billion in 2019. Citing numbers like this, Republicans have characterized any emergency help now as essentially a bailout of poor management. I mean, the president slammed you this week in a presser as well. Is it reasonable for Congress, if they put together the emergency aid you're asking for, to attach strings that restrict how you spend it?
Well, let's point out that all 50 states are suffering from a failure of revenues to come in over the last couple of months. Coronavirus has caused that. All of us are having to spend more on social services and health care to take care of people. And as far as Illinois goes, we balanced the budget this year. We were on our way to a balanced budget for next year as well. So all we've asked for, and frankly the other 49 states too, as far as I know, is just help to replace those revenues that we all lost as a result of this invisible killer.
So do you think you'll get the money, and will there be strings attached?
I don't know whether there'll be strings attached. I hope there aren't too many, because the fact is every state has a problem, and it's different in every state where they need to put the dollars. So putting more strings on it makes it much more difficult for us to move forward to get our economies going. Remember, Illinois has one of the most important economies in the world, not to mention in the nation. So
Certainly.
The federal government's really the only entity that can step in and help us out.
We'll be watching that, Governor. Good luck to you.
And anyway, that's the last clip in my partisan pandemic topic. You can see the issues both about testing, how Jared Kushner was trying to, on behalf of his father-in-law, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, is trying to shift blame to the states for any problems with testing, even though, as J.B. Pritzker pointed out there, the governor of Illinois, that the problems with swabs and with these viral transfer media and with the reagents needed to run the tests, That was a problem that's a problem the federal government needs to solve. And then there's this whole blue state bailout mantra that you're hearing from Republicans, and Mitch McConnell saying that the blue states should declare bankruptcy rather than getting help from. Andrew, at a link down in the video description, I put you can follow to get to Andrew Cuomo's press briefings, and he really fought back on that. If you've been watching those, I've watched pretty much all of those, I think, and about how New York gives a lot more money to the federal government in taxes than it gets back, and Kentucky is like the third least donor state, or the most subservient state to the federal government, where they get a lot more in federal aid than they give in taxes. That's where Mitch McConnell comes from, and that's like another simmering fight that's coming in the partisan pandemic, I'm sorry to say. But anyway, I want to get to my final two clips on my second topic, the Biden battle this week, where he appeared on Morning Joe talking to Mika Brzezinski about the allegations from 1993 that, I don't really need to, I mentioned it earlier, and the first clip I'm going to show you is from ABC News's, both clips are from ABC News's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where they did an extended news summary. It's kind of a transitional news summary because it talks about the partisan divide on the pandemic, and then it transitions into the sexual assault allegations against Biden, and I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that 4.5-minute news summary from Martha Raddatz, where it starts with her doing a live introduction. You can read along in my notes for clip 14, and then she goes to this package. It starts with the last Trump and Biden rallies. That's where I took the screenshots I used for my thumbnail. And anyway, I will talk about all of it a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
8 months from now, we're going to defeat the radical socialists. We're going to win the great state of North Carolina in a landslide.
The press and the pundits had declared this campaign dead. Then South Carolina spoke. Then Super Tuesday spoke. We're going to unite Democrats, Republicans, and independents of every stripe. That's what the nation needs. We got to bring the country together.
President Trump and Joe Biden during their last in-person campaign rallies back in early March. While the coronavirus brought an end to campaigning as we knew it, the campaign hasn't stopped, but the next 6 months will look very different. Questions about whether there can be rallies, conventions, and whether it will be safe to vote come November. We'll bring those questions to the two party chairs, but first, a glimpse at how the virus is impacting some voters' views of the 2020 race from Battleground, Pennsylvania.
The coronavirus has cut our business in half.
Charlie Burnside is the owner of Maple Donuts, open for takeout only under Pennsylvania's statewide stay-at-home order, and he's taking a hit. You said you think the country has really gone too far.
Absolutely, it's gone too far. This is a virus. This isn't the plague.
Just 42% of Americans approve of how President Trump is handling the response to the coronavirus. Burnside remains among his staunch supporters. When you hear President Trump in the very beginning say it's not a problem, we've got it under control, does any of that bother you?
Bother me? He does have it under control. I mean, he can't control the governors, and the governors are what controls the start and the closing of different states. So it's not up to him.
In hard-hit Pennsylvania, there are now more than 50,000 cases of COVID-19 and more than 2,600 deaths. A constant source of fear for many essential workers.
A lot of people under one roof, often working shoulder to shoulder, elbow to elbow.
A Biden supporter, Wendell Young, says he's seen support for Trump among fellow union members decrease over time.
And clearly COVID-19, I think, is going to impact that even more. When it comes to protecting workers, when it comes to having their back in terms of what's happening to them economically right now. He hasn't done anything to help them.
Just a few months ago, the economy could have catapulted Trump to a second term. Now, with more than 30 million filing for unemployment in the last 6 weeks, it could prove to be his greatest challenge.
We built the greatest economy in the world, and I want to get that back as soon as possible.
With both candidates forced off the trail, the traditional 2020 campaign has come to a screeching halt. Trump using his freewheeling briefings to tout his handling of this crisis.
I think we've made a lot of really good decisions.
Joe Biden weighing in on the issues during virtual town halls from his home.
You deserve a government that provides universal access to affordable, high-quality health care, which this guy's not doing at all.
As he faces challenges of his own.
Did you sexually assault Tara Reade?
No, it is not true. I'm saying unequivocally, it never happened.
Denying allegations he sexually assaulted Tara Reade, a staff assistant in Biden's Senate office in 1993. Reade says she filed a complaint with the Senate Personnel Office that Biden made her feel uncomfortable, but did not mention assault. Aside from the issues, the virus could also impact the voting process itself. A recent poll finding roughly 2/3 of Americans believe the virus is likely to significantly disrupt their ability to vote. Experts explain that systems aren't in place to handle a surge in voting by mail.
That's something that's going to be hard to ramp up in time for November. It's expensive. You have to get more machinery. You have to train workers. Ballots need to be printed in time. They need to be mailed in time.
So many uncertainties with just 6 months to go. A lot of questions. And
it's going to be a weird election. It's starting, I don't know what to make exactly of this sexual assault allegation against Joe Biden. Like I said, I watched the full interview. One thing, they showed a clip of Mika Brzezinski questioning Joe Biden there, and I wouldn't say it never isn't saying it never happened, a double negative. Well, it's just, in this case, I guess it's just an emphasis on the word never. I mean, I actually when the whole there's been a lot of comparisons to Brett Kavanaugh, and in this next and final news clip, you're going to see Ronna McDaniel, the head of the Republican National Committee, who I guess at the request of Donald Trump, not after impeachment, but years ago, dropped her maiden name. She used to be Ronna Romney McDaniel, because I think she's Mitt Romney's niece, but now Mitt Romney is like persona non grata in the Republican Party outside of Utah. But you'll see Ronna McDaniel in this next clip as the head of the Republican Party make this comparison to what happened to Brett Kavanaugh. And if you remember, I did some deep analysis of Brett Kavanaugh because I actually lived in the same freshman dorm as Brett Kavanaugh at Yale, because that we were in the same residential college. We lived in Lawrence Hall. I actually vaguely remember him, and remember Deborah Ramirez, who was the accuser, who I think never got enough investigation. I know that his freshman roommate never got interviewed by the FBI in 7 FBI background investigations of Brett Kavanaugh, and I don't want to go off, and I just am very dissatisfied with the investigation to Brett Kavanaugh. So to be all smirky and to say there are all these Republicans who say Brett Kavanaugh was exonerated, which is not true. And anyway, I wanted to show this last clip because I think that it was a good contrast that ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos gave us from Martha Raddatz. First, Ronna McDaniel, the head of the Republican National Committee, then Tom Perez, the head of the Democratic National Committee, both talking about the Tara Reade allegations, and I will talk about all of that a little more after we watch this almost 5.5-minute final news clip together over here.
I know we here at ABC have not ignored, and many in the media have not ignored it, but I want to turn to those accusations. You put out an attack ad against Joe Biden, but the president has also been accused of sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, sexual assault by more than a dozen women. And in a radio interview on Thursday, President Trump said, while Tara Reade, the accuser, sounds credible, I would just say to Joe Biden, just go out and fight it, adding, I guess in a way you could say I'm sticking up for him. Is he sticking up for Joe Biden? And how far will you go with these attack ads?
I'm going to take issue with the media ignoring this. It has been appalling, the hypocrisy as to how Brett Kavanaugh was treated versus Joe Biden. Brett Kavanaugh, every accuser was put on TV. It was wall-to-wall coverage. They went into his high school yearbook. They said he needed an FBI investigation. Michael Avenatti was on TV accusing him of gang rape from an accuser who'd never even met Brett Kavanaugh. And then you go to Joe Biden. 5 weeks of silence, 19 interviews without a single question. He won't let people go into his records in the University of Delaware. They're calling on the DNC to do the investigation. It went from me too, me too, me too, to move on, move on, move on in a nanosecond because he's a Democrat. And the hypocrisy is appalling, and it's not just from the Democrats, it's from the media. And I'll tell you, I think any outlet that conducted those 19 interviews and didn't ask a single question should be disqualified from conducting any part of a presidential debate.
So why did the president say he was, in a way, sticking up for him?
Because due process and the presumption of innocence has no longer been the standard in this country when it comes to Republicans. And now Democrats are suddenly embracing those legal standards that we have made the cornerstone of our country when it comes to Joe Biden. But they threw it out the window when it came to Brett Kavanaugh. And so did the media. And the hypocrisy has been appalling. And we need to do some self-reflection as to how Kavanaugh was treated versus how Biden's being treated right now.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us. So let's bring in Tom Perez. And I want to start with Joe Biden did have days to prepare for his interview about Tara Reade. He denied the allegations and urged the National Archives to release any alleged complaint from Tara Reade. But the archives said they are not responsible for records like that. Biden now says in a formal letter that he was mistaken, that it was at the archives, and asked the Secretary of the Senate for help.
Mm-hmm. Joe Biden has been very clear, Martha, that this did not happen. He was forceful in that, and he's been equally clear that when women come forward with complaints of this nature, they should be taken seriously. Their complaints should be investigated. They should be treated with dignity, and he's done exactly that. He called for the Senate to release any documents they have. She indicated that she filed a complaint. Joe Biden wants that complaint released. He is an open book. He understands that it's important for the information to get out.
But Mr. Perez, I want to stop you right there. Biden also says he will not release documents from his years in the Senate, now at the University of Delaware, because they don't contain personnel matters. And he kind of brushed aside suggestions that a search be done of just Tara Reade's name in those documents. The New York Times editorial board called for the DNC to convene an unbiased, apolitical panel to review portions of Biden's papers, saying his word is insufficient to dispel the cloud. Your communications director has called that idea absurd. Why?
Well, listen, there's been so many investigations of the vice president. The most comprehensive investigation of the vice president was when he was vetted by Barack Obama in 2008. I'm very familiar with vice presidential vetting process. They look at everything about you. They looked at the entire history of Joe Biden, his entire career. And I'll tell you, if Barack Obama had any indication that there was an issue, Barack Obama would not have had him as his vice president. Barack Obama trusted Joe Biden. I trust Joe Biden. And those investigations have been done. Now, let's talk about Delaware for a moment. The University of Delaware, and any university that takes somebody's documents, they're taking their policy documents, they're taking their speeches, they're not taking their personnel records. And in fact,
but why not just search Tara Reade in those documents?
This is like the Hillary emails, because there was nothing there. And the reason is, if I'm going, I worked on the Senate Judiciary Committee in 1995. The ranking member was Joe Biden. If you want, I wasn't working for Joe Biden, I was working for Senator Kennedy. If you want to see my personnel records, you don't go to the Kennedy Institute. That's not where they go. And so when you ask the University of Delaware to take a look at something, you're asking them to look for something that doesn't exist. And the fact of the matter is that the President of the United States, the former President, Barack Obama, conducted an exhaustive search.
And that was 2008.
Open book.
I want to move on.
And she moves on to non-Tara Reade related issues like she talked about with Ronna McDaniel before the beginning of that clip. But I thought that was a good contrast there. And kudos to ABC for bringing up the major mistake that Joe Biden made in his interview with Mika Brzezinski on Morning Joe, that that is the most disturbing part so far in terms of like demonstrable evidence, is that Joe Biden served in the Senate for all those years and he doesn't know what part of the Senate would have the records of this complaint if it were made. He mentioned the wrong part of the Senate, the National Archives, when it's actually in some other part of the, I don't even know. I haven't spent any years in the Senate, but Joe Biden was elected to the Senate when he was like 30-something years old and spent many, many years there. So he should be able to know what part of the Senate has those records. And so that was like a unforced error from Biden. But I think I pretty much criticized that clip. If you remember what I said about in the Kavanaugh thing with Christina Blasey Ford, I watched her testimony and then I watched Kavanaugh's testimony, and she seemed credible. Even Trump said she seemed credible after the morning of her testimony. And then Kavanaugh came out and he was like this angry white guy who was obviously lying about his drinking based on what I know about his freshman year at Yale, and especially about his joining of this fraternity where people get like blind drunk on pledge night, and he claimed he never did. And anyway, that's the tangent I didn't want to get into, but whether I waited till I heard the testimony of Christina Blasey Ford and then Kavanaugh, and based on my experience as a criminal trial attorney, I thought she seemed more credible than he did. I haven't seen Tara Reade yet really do an interview. Supposedly she was supposed to be on Fox News Sunday this morning and then canceled because of death threats, so that's sort of a wait and see. But anyway, that's my analysis of that. And I did promise I'd mention how I may be involved in this police misconduct video that went viral last week. The Rancho Cordova Police Department, which is in Sacramento County. I'm chair of the Sacramento area chapter of the ACLU, and I may be the last only person who can give a public statement. You know, normally everything I say, I'm just giving my own opinions. I don't speak for the ACLU, even though I'm chair of that chapter. Chapters are just volunteer activists. ACLU messaging comes from paid staff members, but occasionally I do get the opportunity to say something on behalf of the ACLU, and that might happen at a press conference tomorrow. If that happens and I get video of it, I will share that on my channel, and you can see me in one of those rare occasions when I actually do get to speak on behalf of the ACLU, although everything I said today and on all my other videos is, of course, just my personal opinion, not on behalf of the ACLU. And anyway, before I finish, I did want to give you a bonus Dash and Sandy clip, which I captured at the food bowl before Sandy's dinner. There is some face-to-face Dash and Sandy interaction, some noises from both animals, and I will show that to you before I end the show tonight here. And anyway, I hope you enjoyed that final Dash and Sandy clip that I captured for you, and all the other clips I picked out for you, all the work I put in on this, the 367th Sunday of my LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundups. If I have some reason to upload another video, maybe this press conference I might participate in tomorrow, that's kind of stressing me out because, well, anyway, I already talked about that, but if that happens, I'll upload video if it's available, or some other reason to upload video. Otherwise, I will be back next Sunday and every Sunday for at least the rest of 2020, and until next week, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.